This is your before and after story. Southeastern College can help you prepare for a secure and fulfilling career in the growing healthcare field. We offer a wide range of careers to choose from. So whether you want to be a medical assistant, medical billing and coding specialist, nurse, surgical technologist, or another healthcare career, we've got you covered. Become a vital part of a healthcare team and make a real difference. Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to say, ahoy, or land ho, and not feel weird about it. So here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance offers access to the largest towing fleet on the water. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to say, shiver me timbers, and not feel weird about that either. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abuelsamid.
So first, a word about what we're doing, because this is our first episode and it's a new venture. But I think really we wanted to talk about things that are actually important to the automotive space and, real enthusiasts who are interested in more than sort of the tabloid coverage. Is that sort of where you're going, Sam?
Absolutely. It's like we want to talk about what's happening in cars and transportation and the future of transportation and the people that are helping to create that.
All right, so let's get to it.
Let's do it.
So the first thing we want to talk about is everybody's favorite segment from our old days on the Autoblog podcast, which is the garage and what we've been driving. And Sam, you are getting cars because you work for Navigant. And so you've been in a couple of cool things, or a couple of interesting things, I should say. One cool thing, one interesting thing to a family guy like me. So we'll start with the cars you've been driving while you were out jet setting.
All right, so I was out in San Francisco last week to speak at a couple of different conferences, which we'll talk a little bit more about a little later on. But while I was out there, I had the opportunity to drive the Jaguar F-Pace S, which is Jaguar's first SUV.
And that's the cool one.
Yeah, that's the cool one. Well, actually, the other one's pretty cool in its own right too. But the F-Pace it's really an impressive vehicle. It's back, I don't know, maybe about a dozen years ago, when they first started talking about Jaguar doing an SUV when they and Land Rover were still owned by Ford. All the speculation was that basically they would, get a variant of the Range Rover. And of course that never came to pass. And then, 6 or 7 years ago, Ford sold off Jaguar and Land Rover to India's Tata Motors. And now, that Jaguar has got themselves reestablished, Jaguar and Land Rover have themselves reestablished with new vehicles, new platforms that they've designed under Tata ownership. They've added a couple of new vehicles to the Jaguar lineup with the compact XE sedan and the F-Pace SUV, which is probably the closest competitor to it, in terms of its overall character, is like the Porsche Cayenne. It's definitely more of a sporting crossover. Definitely not really an off-road SUV. So it's basically a sport wagon, that rides high like an SUV. And
it's not an intentional off-road SUV anyway, for sure.
Right. So it borrows a lot of hardware from the F-Type sports car, and generally that's a good thing. Excuse me. It drives really well. While we were out in San Francisco, my wife and I went down, spent the weekend in Carmel. And drove down to Big Sur, and driving along the coast, the roads along Route 1 along the coast there, it definitely drives like a Jag, like you would expect a Jag sports car to, except, obviously you're sitting up higher.
So that's like that driving means it's like slightly muscle car-ish, right? Like it's got a little bit of athleticism to it, little bit of like the blunt force that like the F-Type has.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got it's a fairly stiff ride. It's not It's not real. It's not what I would call supple, but it handles corners really well. It's got good steering feel. It's fairly quick. I mean, for its size, for an SUV, it's not lightweight by any stretch of the imagination, but a little over 4,000 pounds. It's not a real tank either. So, the F-Pace S model has, it's got a 380 horsepower version of the 3-liter supercharged V6, that's in other F-Paces, and the base engine in the F-Pace is a 2-liter 4-cylinder diesel. But the S is currently the quickest version of the F-Pace, so it'll do 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds, and it's a lot of fun to drive. Once we got into San Francisco, where the roads are a little more uneven and generally not as smooth, you definitely feel the compromises they made to the ride quality. So it moves around a little bit more, but it wasn't harsh or uncomfortable. But it's definitely not as slick as you might have expected of a Jaguar of old.
So how well was it received in San Francisco, which is this weird dichotomy of a city that's very conscious of luxury goods in a lot of ways these days?
I didn't really get any second looks over the thing. I mean, nobody really commented on it. I don't think anybody really noticed it. There's a lot of affluence in San Francisco. There's also a lot of people that are far less than affluent in San Francisco, that are struggling to get by. So, like any other big city, it's got its share of just about any kind of vehicle. There's certainly plenty of Priuses and lots of Teslas around San Francisco, including lots of Model X's. But, it fit in just fine.
And like, in terms of, one of the things that I've picked up about the comparisons of the F-Pace is, yes, it's great. It drives well. It looks fantastic. Interior wise, it might not measure up to the rest of the class. How did you feel about that?
At its price point, it starts, the base price is only $41,000, which, it's not cheap, but it's pretty good, pretty reasonable value compared to, say, the Cayenne or an X5. And it's not super luxurious, but the model I had, the F-Pace S, which is the higher end model, had really nice leather on the seats, and it was pretty nicely trimmed out, had plenty of amenities. So I certainly, at 57 grand, compared to what you're going to get from one of the German brands, I think it was probably as good as any of those at that price point. Now, certainly you can, the BMWs and Audis and Porsches and Mercedes, you can price those up to much, much higher price points. You can easily get their midsize SUVs up into the $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 range, with all the options and all the luxury goodies. And it's certainly not going to compare to those, but it's also not priced like them. So
yeah, they don't have one priced there yet.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that Jaguar's done in the past year, they announced about a year ago that they were going to adjust their pricing for the whole lineup. So they actually lowered the price points on all their models about a year ago, to get them, they had been trying to price them to more directly compete with the Germans, and they found that wasn't really working, and so they lowered the prices and adjusted the equipment levels, so you actually get a fairly reasonable value, compared to the segment now. So they're not cheap, but I think they're priced about right, and so it's certainly, let's put it this way, compared to $100,000 Tesla, I think it was certainly more luxurious and better outfitted than a $100,000 Tesla. So I wouldn't complain.
Yeah. Well, and I remember when they did that.
And the doors work too.
Yeah, the doors, they don't leak. I remember when they did that just a year ago, they offered more equipment. The stuff that was bundled became standard. It was bundled as an option package. It became standard. And then they also bumped their warranty. And I think they added maintenance, or maybe that's just under the lease, but no, I think it was.
Yeah, I think you get like a three or 4 years maybe of complimentary maintenance included, and roadside assistance, and the same kind of stuff that everybody else is offering now on new cars.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good deal. I know we're talking about luxury vehicles, but like the money equation for a Jaguar is pretty good, and the F-Pace is certainly going to stand out in a pretty crowded field. So it's strange that like they waited so long, but when they finally brought it out, they've come out with a pretty good winner. It's not anywhere near a copy of a Land Rover.
Yeah, I mean it doesn't really overlap with anything in the Land Rover lineup. Maybe about the closest thing is going to be the Range Rover Sport. But even that, is a bigger vehicle, and it's got a different kind of character, and certainly a different look from this. And then the Evoque, the Range Rover Evoque, is a significantly smaller vehicle. So there's nothing really in the Land Rover lineup that is direct competitor to the F-Pace. So I think they've done it right. They've kind of found, at least what for them is a white space in their lineup. It's certainly, directly competitive with a lot of other vehicles in the segment, but it's also, one of the few segments in the overall market that's growing and growing rapidly, is the smaller and mid-sized crossovers and SUVs.
Yeah. Now, if we could just talk to them about that XE wagon.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I doubt we'll ever see that here in the U.S. I think the F-Pace is probably about as close as we're ever going to get to a Jaguar wagon here on this side of the Atlantic.
That's all right. But you jumped from that, like I said, that's the cool one, but you've teased the Pacifica, so we'll talk about the Pacifica, which is cool in its own right, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got back to Detroit on Friday night. I picked up the new Chrysler Pacifica, which is far and away the best minivan that Chrysler has ever built. This vehicle is really impressive. It, like all the past Chrysler minivans, or at least, all but, everything after about the first generation, it's huge inside. It's a really attractive vehicle. I think it's the best looking minivan on the market today. Better than anything else. It drives really well. The powertrain is smooth. It's got plenty of amenities inside. They've got the stow and go seats, for both the second and third rows, so you can, you don't, if you need to haul some cargo, you can just drop the seats right down into a well in the floor, and have a flat load floor all the way up to the back of the front seats. It's got all the goodies in there. It's not cheap. It's in the upper $40,000 range in this case, because it's pretty much loaded with every available option. But
yeah, is that a limited that you have?
Yeah, so it's, but again, it's priced competitively with, a loaded Honda Odyssey or Toyota Sienna, or Kia Sedona. So, it's not priced. It's not the pricing's not out of line with the competition.
Yeah, they are not cheap.
Yeah, no minivans are. But you know what? If you've got a family, with 3 or more kids that you need to haul around, I'd much rather do it in a minivan than in an SUV. It's, especially if you've got younger kids that you're putting, you've got to strap into booster seats or child seats. It's just so much easier with the hands-free power sliding side doors, and, swing your foot under the bumper to open the tailgate, that sort of thing. You don't have to reach up. It's at the perfect height if you've got to strap kids in, and, mine are grown up, and, if I have to strap them in now, it's
it's a straitjacket.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. But if I had young kids, I would choose a minivan over an SUV any day. But hey, I'm an oddball with these sort of things anyway.
No,
so.
I mean you're not. There's 2 different things. There's the practical, and then there's the emotional. And practically, nothing beats a minivan. It carries most of its load within its wheelbase. It's low to the ground because it's car-based. It's all of the things that we love about crossovers, except for it's a box. So it doesn't have that style.
It doesn't. The Pacifica doesn't really look like a box. I mean, it's boxy, but it's also very stylish. I mean, they did a fabulous job translating the design language that we've seen on recent Chryslers, like the 200. Onto this van, and it looks really good.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that. And I think this is the first the first full departure from the original T platform, T body. It might. I'm trying to remember because they introduced the minivan in '84. It was based on the K car, but it was the T platform,
right.
T body, and then they updated it it got its mid-cycle refresh, and then it got fully
like
updated.
92 or 93, they did a full body redesign, but it still shared a lot of the original platform.
Right, and then in the mid-90s, they redid it again, like 95, 96. Yeah. It got very round. And then, they redid it. I think there's a lot of T-body still in there.
Yeah, I mean, this one, I don't think that there's really anything carried over into this latest generation. And the other thing that the one I'm driving right now doesn't have, but that will be coming out in the next month or so, Chrysler's actually going to be doing a media drive out in LA in conjunction with the LA Auto Show, is the plug-in hybrid version, which will be a first for the minivan segment. Chrysler's designed an all-new hybrid powertrain that is launching in the Pacifica, and no doubt will eventually show up in other vehicles as well. And it's got enough battery for about roughly 30 miles of all electric driving. So it'll be interesting to see where they price that one, and what kind of real world mileage people get out of that one.
Yeah, well, that's kind of your beat. So I'd be interested to hear your take on why has it taken so long for? It seems like such a natural fit for a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid minivan. Like that's such a perfect area for, besides $100,000 executive Camrys. This seems like a perfect venue for hybrid and electrification. Why is it taking so long?
I think part of it is, the cost. The cost of batteries is starting to come down. It's come down pretty significantly in the past 2-3 years. So that helps, to get it at the right price point. We've certainly over the last 2-3 years seen a significant number of new models, plug-in hybrid models, show up in premium brands. And what we're seeing, from the Germans in particular, from Audi, Mercedes, BMW, is they're putting plug-in hybrids into the bigger and mid-size sedans and SUVs. And what they've done is, rather than tune them purely for maximum fuel efficiency, like Prius style, they tune them so they get a significant bump in fuel efficiency, but they also are able to get a boost in performance. So they're actually selling them more as much as performance upgrades as they are as efficiency upgrades, and that way they're able to get a higher price point from consumers. So they'll slot it into the lineup, closer to the top end of the lineup from both a performance standpoint as well as the equipment they put in it. And then that way they can sell it at a price, where they can recover the extra cost, the incremental cost of the batteries and the electric powertrain. And so that's working out, seems reasonably well for some of these brands, for Porsche and for Mercedes-Benz and BMW. BMW's within the next couple of years is going to have plug-in hybrid options available on pretty much their entire lineup. And they started at the top, with the 7 Series and the X5, and gradually working their way down.
Well, and that X5 hybrid is really, really good to drive.
It is.
Which I was
had one
by.
A few months ago.
And that's even with the Honda Accord, there is that cachet to hybrid that it can command that higher price, I think, because they generally make it a nicer car too when they're doing this now. Is like I had the Accord hybrid not too long ago, and it's dressed up like a premium midsize sedan. It was very nice, and there was not as much weirdness as there has been with the handoff between, and the Honda's hybrid system's gotten a lot more refined. But it just felt like, a car with a powerful engine. Didn't really notice too much of the hybridness. So,
yeah, that's true of pretty much every brand now. Pretty much all the latest generations of hybrids have become a lot more transparent. So they don't, other than the quietness, when you're driving them, and in the case of a lot of these cars with plug-in hybrids, the lack of cargo space. Other than that, they drive pretty much like any other car.
Yeah.
The one downside, on some of the plug-ins, like the Hyundai Sonata plug-in hybrid and the Ford Fusion Energy plug-in hybrid and some of these others, is you do give up a significant portion of your trunk space to the battery, the extra battery. But other than that, there's nothing about it really that screams plug-in or hybrid. It's just a regular car that's really efficient.
I mean, the Sonata is really interesting too, because they've got that lithium polymer battery that can mold to the shape, so it actually loses less of the trunk than, and the battery I think is under the rear seat, so they lose less.
Part
trunk
of it's
space.
under the rear seat. Yeah, I mean, it still loses about half of its trunk space, but you do have more cargo space in the Sonata than you do in the Fusion.
And it has a 6-speed automatic too. So I actually really like driving the Sonata hybrid. It's really good to drive too. So
yeah, no, they've done a great job on that one.
But yeah, getting back to the van too, so 30 miles when they introduced the plug-in, like most people's average one-way commute is what, like 25, something like that, 25 miles. So you could,
or less than that even, for, probably for at least half the population, they drive less than 30 miles a day. So if you plug it in every night, you could almost never use gas, except for your longer trips. Yeah.
That's pretty compelling in its own right. It's not going to have, I think it's not going to have stow and go, right? Like you got to give that up.
Yeah, the wells where for the second row seats where the seats drop into, that's where the battery goes on the hybrid. So you lose the stow and go for the second row seats, but you still have it for the third row seats.
Well, that's not too bad.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a sacrifice, but it's not terrible.
So instead of talking about future Pacificas, though, so the one that you actually drove, so it was nice. It had the Pentastar V6. The last one I drove was the previous generation, and even though it had the Pentastar, like it felt heavy and like it struggled. How is this one to actually just drive?
This one's much better. For 2017, they actually launched last year on the 2016 Grand Cherokees an updated version of the Pentastar. It's got a new variable valve timing system and had a bunch of other changes to it to make it a little more efficient. It had a small bump in power, but that was fairly marginal. But overall, it drives really well. So there's no real complaints about it. I mean, again, this is not a lightweight vehicle. It's well over 4,000 pounds. But it's also a pretty big vehicle. And it's got, more than adequate performance for what it is. It's not a sports van, it's a people hauler, and it does just fine. There's nothing to complain about. It's certainly it's at least as good or better than the competition. It'll be interesting to see what Honda comes out with next year. They're due for a new Odyssey, which I think is going to be coming out next spring. And Toyota will probably have a new Sienna sometime next year. So those are the other two chief competitors. But Chrysler did a really good job on this vehicle. It's got excellent ride quality. It's got more than adequate performance, and it's got decent acceleration. So
is it your favorite? Is it your favorite minivan in the? I won't say minivan, but is it your favorite of the segment? Or is
at this point,
Sienna
Odyssey? Absolutely, yeah.
Is that you think it's just because it's the newest, or because it's
Well, I mean, it's the newest, but it's also really well executed. They've done everything really well on it. I mean, it's a good looking vehicle, for what it is. Regardless of what it is, it's very attractive. The design language that they debuted on the 200 a couple of years ago, which unfortunately is going to be fairly short lived, but at least that design language actually translates really well to the van. So I think it's going to be very successful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, my previous sort of favorite in this segment was the Sienna, not because it was the best to drive. I think the best to drive, and I haven't tried the Pacifica yet. It hasn't made its way to my New England driveway because of the way fleets work. But the Odyssey is the best. The Sienna was just the best blend of ride comfort, features. None of them are. I guess if you buy the lower end trim levels, they're a decent value, but when you're driving a family vehicle, you You want something that you can just relax and put on the miles because there's enough stress.
Yeah, I mean, this one's got, the rear seat entertainment system, so you got screens on the back of the front seats, for the second row passengers, and they can, you can put in, it's got a Blu-ray player, you can stick in a Blu-ray disc, and you can have different things on each of the two rear screens. So you can have a kid on one side that's watching a movie and a kid on the other side. There's a bunch of games that are built into the infotainment system so they can play checkers or Sudoku, they're touch screens.
That's cool.
And so you can also play play a video from a thumb drive or some other media source. So you can have two different movies going in the back seat, with them listening on wireless headphones. So there's plenty of stuff to keep the rear seat occupants busy and keep them from pestering you too much about, are we there yet?
And that's all the latest generation of Uconnect stuff, so it's actually pretty easy to use too. So that's
it's got a nice interface that's it's responsive, and it's a nice looking screen. So it's a good vehicle. All
right, well let's stay on the people mover.
Yeah, so what are you driving this week?
So I just waved goodbye to the Nissan Armada Platinum, which is a very good people mover. It's also very good at using fuel. It consumed to the tune of 15.9 miles to the gallon. No matter what I did, that's the average I got. So, the trade-off is you get the latest version of the VK56 V8, which is fantastic. It's 390 horsepower. It's very punchy. It's definitely got the authority to pull this big body on frame SUV around. And the Armada itself in platinum trim is it's pretty close to being an Infiniti. The QX80 shares this platform now. The Armada is nicely turned out enough in this trim that you don't really need the Infiniti. And even the lower trims, if you don't buy the platinum, I think they've got like SV or whatever for some of the other trims. It's still nicely equipped, and it's not that bad a deal. I think it starts around 50 something. This one in platinum trim lists for like 62,000, which I mean it's a lot of money. It's for a Nissan too, but when you consider it's a 3-row SUV, it's got 4-wheel drive, and this one had leather seats and the infotainment, and a big V8. So it's capable of towing. I think its towing capacity is like 7,500 or 8,500 pounds. So it can tow your boat, no problem. It's a very capable vehicle. It's definitely overkill if you're just going to use it like a station wagon. But there are people that need a vehicle like this, and this is a good choice. When you consider what it competes with, it competes with the Expedition and the Tahoe and Yukon. Suburban, that kind of stuff. There are some areas where I feel like it does miss a little bit. You don't get locking differentials on it. I suppose that's kind of not a big deal when it's a family vehicle, but I feel like you should at least have the option to add the locking differentials. Maybe that's.
I think you can get those on the Infiniti though, right?
I believe you can. Yeah. The Infiniti has the Infiniti has the air suspension, I believe, or just the suspension that actively manages roll. The Pathfinder, the Armada is a little bit more conventional. It didn't ride poorly. It had big wheels in platinum trim, so there's actually a lot of low frequency energy in the cabin. You'll notice as you go down a bumpy road, even just on asphalt, there's just this thrum. And I think that's just the wheel and tire package that it has. It was really nice to get on the highway and just put the pedal down and just feel this huge thing take off. But again, the practical side of it does fall down a little bit. It uses a lot of fuel. It actually shrank in its move from the old F Alpha platform to the Patrol platform that it's on now. The back seat is not as large. I think it's actually a little bit narrower, and the third row loses a ton of space from what it had before. the dog was happy. He didn't care, but you can see that the third row is less leg room. There's less cargo space when it's deployed, and then when you stow it, the way they've got the spare tire, it's got all of those traditional SUV drawbacks. The load floor is actually high to reach up into. You gotta have a reason to buy one of these. I wouldn't suggest buying it just because you want a 3-row. If you want a 3-row and you don't want the pain of an actual SUV, there's so many crossover choices. This becomes less of a compelling deal. Like, definitely actually go buy a Pathfinder. The Pathfinder is a better vehicle just as a family vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, if you just want a family hauler, that you're right. The Pathfinder is definitely a superior choice there. It's got more room inside, and it's going to be a lot more fuel efficient. But if you're looking for something to tow with, the Pathfinder is definitely not going to cut it. It doesn't. Its towing capability is much lower than the Patrol, and it certainly isn't going to have. I mean, it's got some off-road capability, but it's not anywhere near as robust as what you can do with this thing.
Yeah, this one will get you stuck way, way further away from civilization.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, that this is based on the Patrol the Nissan Patrol that they sell everywhere else in the world outside of North America. Which is one of the reasons why they did this. I mean, Nissan doesn't expect this to be a huge volume seller, but it didn't take a whole lot of engineering investment to create this, because they already had the Patrol and you had the QX80 and Infiniti dealerships. And so, whatever additional sales they get, from this one is just, that's incremental volume, and it's very high margin volume, which is why they're doing it.
Yeah, and it's not a bad truck.
Oh, yeah.
The whole week I had it, I was thinking, it makes sense that Mercedes would pick Nissan to partner with to develop their own pickup, because this is a pretty nice truck. They clearly they can make a good truck, a good conventional truck, even though that's typically thought of as the domain of the big three here in the US. Like, in the rest of the world, they still need body on frame pickups, and they're not buying F-150s.
Yeah. Well,
So
have you driven the new Titan?
I have not.
It's actually really good. I'd say it's as good as the domestic pickups in almost all respects, and actually has surprisingly good driving dynamics. Good handling and good ride quality.
Yeah, it's so like that. All of those were pretty present here too. And just the cabin layout is good. Nissan's infotainment system is easy to use, so it hits a lot of high notes. It's a good truck, but you gotta want a truck for this. It's not, and especially with the Nissan badge, it's not the status symbol that the Infiniti is, and even that's a little dubious.
Right. Well, and that, again, that's why, Nissan's got multiple offerings, so you can pick the right one for your lifestyle, the one that suits your needs, so as you said, this one's not for everybody, probably for the majority, for the mainstream, the Pathfinder's the right choice, but there's a niche out there that wants a vehicle like this, and so, they're going to offer it.
Yeah. And it has a reason to exist, and, having a choice between the domestic offerings, because I'll get in the Expedition or the Expedition. I was thinking the Excursion, but they don't make that anymore. I'll get in the Expedition and I'll just think like, oh gosh, this thing feels really cheap, and I'll get in the GMs and I'll feel like there's something, like, they're not Goldilocks trucks. This is actually a little closer to being a Goldilocks truck from a driver's perspective. The ergonomics are good. It's comfortable. It's solid. It's pretty quiet. And part of that is, I guess, that, driving the Platinum trim, my view is colored by all of the nice stuff it had. But then again, when you look at the Platinum trim and how nicely loaded it is compared to a very well loaded domestic vehicle of the same class, like, it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it certainly is. So what else you got?
Yeah, speaking of good deals, and so I got a Mitsubishi Outlander Sport 2.4 SEL AWC. So Mitsubishi has been selling this vehicle. This was Project Global for Mitsubishi. It's been around for like a decade, this basic vehicle, maybe even more. I've gone on the record as really like abusive about this particular vehicle before. It's not bad. For 2017, they've restyled it. It looks pretty good, actually. I have never had a complaint really about the styling.
This is the smaller one, right?
Yeah. It's the small. The other one is the Outlander, which is I think that's the 3-row.
Yeah.
Which I've also had not too long ago. It definitely feels built to a price. But it has.
That's a kind way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little cheap, but it is cheap. It's $26,000, and it's got.
Hey, for a compact crossover these days, that's actually a pretty reasonable price.
Yeah, it's I think it's leather seats, and then SEL trim. It's pretty well loaded. It's got high intensity discharge low beams. It's got the audio system that won't pair with anything.
Do you have a 2017 or a 2016 model?
Actually, you know what? This says
it got a refresh for 2017.
Yeah.
So the front fascia and the rear has been updated a little bit. It's actually a pretty decent looking. I mean, even before the refresh, it was pretty decent looking.
Yeah, this is weird because it looks all the world like a 2017, but the Monroney that came with it is 2016. So I don't know. Maybe I haven't looked all that close. I've only had it for a couple of days, so I've been rocking the Crown Victoria in between. Because I will admit, it showed up at the curb, and I was like, ugh. Which is it's like that's a total douche thing to do when you're getting free cars to drive for a week. It's like, don't ever do that. That's my advice to anybody who winds up in this profession. Don't get so jaded that you roll your eyes and groan at the car that shows up from the automaker's sort of best. I guess they trust you. I don't even know what I'm trying to say.
No, you're right. I mean, you don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth, and
right.
I mean, it's not. I don't want to call it a gift, but I mean, for me, I work from home, so I don't have an office to commute to. But when I get vehicles every week, I make a point of going out and driving them and putting some miles on them, driving them in different conditions, and I take them to go to meetings and to various events, briefings with car makers and suppliers. So I try to drive them in various conditions and understand what are these vehicles all about? Where do they work? Where do they not work? And also, using the features and the technology that the car makers have built into this, because this is, that's an area that's increasingly important. And it's something we're going to try and talk a lot about on this show, is, where's transportation going? Where are these vehicles going? What's the future of personal mobility and all the technology that's in here? So, even though, I usually know where I'm going, I make a point of using the navigation, and if the vehicle's equipped with a navigation system, using the navigation, using the infotainment, using the voice recognition systems, to see how they work, to figure out what works, what doesn't, and see how they compare, and especially when there's new technologies, like things like the gesture control system in the new BMW 7 Series. It's fascinating to see how that stuff is changing and evolving over time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an important point, and that's one of the things that I wanted to do as well with this is give a real assessment of the vehicle from a segment-aware perspective. Know where it fits. So like when we talk about the Pacifica, not just say like, well, it's not a Boxster. Well, yes, no kidding, Dick Tracy.
But it's not supposed to be either.
Right, and that's so while I can say, the Outlander feels a little bit inexpensive and built to a price. Well, it is. But then you look at what they're offering with what they have too. Mitsubishi is behind the 8 ball in this this market for a variety of reasons, but they've got old platforms, and yet the effort that they're making with old platforms is decent. If you didn't know anything about what's under these vehicles, or if you weren't as into it as we are, and you just went and test drove a few things, this wouldn't feel too bad. It's got a 2.4 liter engine, so it's pretty spunky. It idles smooth. It's quiet for the most part, especially for the class. Compact SUVs and crossovers are not exactly the most relaxing place to be. for $27,000, it's pretty well equipped. So and it drives well too, and it's always driven pretty well. My biggest sticking point is the CVT, but that's not faint praise. Like it even has 4-wheel drive. So for that price, its biggest competitor is what? A Subaru or one of its platform cousins like the Jeep Compass or Patriot. I'm trying to think of what else really compares at $27K. I mean, I guess you can get into all-wheel drive CRVs or RAV4s, but I feel like those are, again, like a little size class larger than the Outlander Sport.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at any of the compact crossovers like the CRV, Escape, the 26, 27 grand is pretty much the entry point now for most of those. I mean, that's kind of like the low end. And it's pretty easy to get those well up into the mid to upper 30s without trying too hard.
Yeah.
So if you can get a reasonably equipped Outlander Sport, in that price range, that's actually not a bad deal. I mean, the next kind of segment down, the subcompact crossovers like the Honda HRV and the Mazda CX-3 and a few others are going to be in that same price point, but they're smaller.
Yeah.
And you're getting less vehicle for the money.
Right, and they're also a much hotter deal too. Like the HRV, like they're not discounting like a Mitsubishi dealer's going to discount them to move the metal.
You got a much better chance of haggling for a good price at a Mitsubishi dealership than at a Honda dealership.
Yeah, and I mean it's those are all of the things that fit into the equation. So it's competitively priced, it's competitively equipped, it's making the most of what you got, and I'm interested to see what comes out of Mitsubishi's tie-up with Renault Nissan now too, to see what that means for vehicles for us.
Yeah, I mean Renault Nissan just closed a deal to buy 34% of Mitsubishi, I think last week. So they now have controlling interest in Mitsubishi, and Carlos Ghosn is taking over, I guess, as chairman of Mitsubishi. So he still gets to only be CEO of two companies, but he will be chairman of Mitsubishi.
Maybe he'll make his wife a Mirage convertible.
Yeah, don't say that too loud. I think you should edit that out.
All right, we should move on to the next couple of topics. We want to cover some news. We want to cover some tech details that don't get really talked about all that much. They sort of get glossed over. I think part of it is the automotive journalism world at large. They don't necessarily have the focus to really dig in. They want to blog about stuff and keep the posts moving. But there's some things that we should talk about a little bit more in depth. And one of the things that you brought up was that Mercedes-Benz has a new generation of engines, and the thing that stood out to me the most, and I know they're talking about it too, is that the electrical systems are 48 volts.
Yeah.
And so that's been coming for a while, and it's already here on things like trucks and stuff.
Actually, no, it's not.
Okay.
The first 48 volt systems came out earlier this year in Europe on the Audi SQ7. The new SQ7 was the first car with a 48 volt system, and Mercedes, and then they're going to be adding it to the new generation SQ5, which goes into production in the next couple of months, and then also and Mercedes is bringing it out on a bunch of vehicles in 2017.
So what am I thinking of them, like semi trucks? They don't run 48 volt like that?
I'm not sure what they run on semis. I think they actually still mostly run 12 volt systems.
Huh. All right.
Or
well,
maybe
that aside,
maybe 24 volts. Well,
yeah.
I'll have to take a look into that. I haven't really looked at the heavy duty truck market and their electrical systems.
It doesn't really matter much to us car people, but
exactly.
So, but why is 48 volts important? Like, what does it mean for the automotive, like the car sector?
Well, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of new features and functions in modern cars, most of which require electricity to run. And with a 12-volt electrical system, which is what we've used, on most vehicles since, about the mid-1950s, they started making the transition from 6-volt to 12-volt in the 1950s, and by the I think by about the early 70s, the last of the 6-volt systems were pretty much gone. So with 12-volt systems, you're limited. 12-volt systems, generate about 200 amps, 200 to 250 amps.
Yeah.
And so you can get about 2.5, maybe 3 kilowatts, at the high end of total electrical power from a 12-volt electrical system. If you want to go any higher than that, you've got to have a significantly bigger alternator, and that requires a bigger drive belt. You've got to have more tension on it in order to drive the alternator to get to get extra anything more than 2.5 to 3 kilowatts out of a 12-volt alternator. And so that starts to add, to friction and drag on the engine, reduces your fuel economy. So, what the auto industry has done is they've pretty much, they after a lot of back and forth, in the 1990s, they looked at switching to 42-volt systems. And for a number of reasons, mainly due to cost and a few other things, they ended up not going there. They decided that they made improvements in other areas, reduced the electrical loads in other areas, so they were able to get by without doing 42 volts. But now, they're back to where they were, where they need extra electrical power, and so they're going to 48-volt systems. And so with a 48-volt system at 200 amps, or 250 amps, they can now run 12, or they can now get up to 10 to 12 kilowatts of electrical power. And so that means that they can use that electrical power for things like doing mild hybrid systems. They can start switching over things like oil pumps and coolant pumps from being engine driven to electrical. So now they can control those, more, do control based on the actual load and need of those pumps, go to electric air conditioning systems, that sort of thing. All of that reduces the loads on the engine and helps to improve your overall efficiency of the powertrain. And then, the other thing that's coming up now is we're getting this rapid switch towards more highly automated vehicles, going to semi-autonomous and then fully autonomous vehicles. And those, as you go to, autonomous vehicles, you need more electrical power for the steering gear, for the electrical steering system in order to steer the vehicle under all conditions at all speeds, to power the sensors and the processing system. So we need a lot more than 2.5 kilowatts of electrical power. And so that's why we're going to 48. And the reason why we're not going higher than 48 is because 60 volts is the threshold from a regulatory standpoint. Once you go past 60 volts, that's considered a high voltage system. So you have to start putting a lot more protections, against electrocution into the system. So 48 volts gives you enough of a margin in there. So even when you have an over voltage, you're not going to hit that 60 volt threshold. And so it's the kind of the sweet spot of maximizing your electrical power without having to add a huge amount of extra cost.
I mean, that's just astounding, the amount of power the cars use. Like 10 kilowatts, like that's 10,000 watts. That's a lot of juice. And so you're saying like they could do like a mild hybrid without having a separate battery for it. It would be the same basically electrical system.
Yeah.
That runs the main.
I mean, you'll still, and for at least for, the first 5 or 10 years, because there's still a lot of systems that run at 12 volts. What we'll probably see is most of the vehicles coming to market will actually have 2 batteries. So you'll have dual voltage systems. So you'll have a 12 volt, probably still in most cases a 12 volt lead battery to do, the cold starts, and then the 48 volt battery for doing regenerative braking and the hybrid stuff, and to store energy for all the other electrical systems. So you have a mix between 12 and 48 volts. And the 48 volt batteries in many cases will be lithium ion batteries. And the reason why they want to keep 12 volt starter batteries is because lithium ion batteries lose a lot of power at cold temperatures. And so the lead batteries do much better at cold temperatures than lithium batteries do. So the 12-volt lead battery will give you a reliable cold start, even in winter conditions, extreme winter conditions. And then a 48-volt lithium battery will give you the storage capacity and the electrical power you need for all the other stuff. Just as an example of the electrical loads, it's estimated that for an autonomous vehicle, for a fully autonomous vehicle, the steering gear for that at peak loads could be as much as 4 kilowatts of demand. Yeah,
that's a lot of yeah.
Because that's to give you the redundancy and everything that you need for a really reliable system. So that's what's driving, and that's also the reason why, if you look at all the autonomous vehicles that are being tested today, whether it's Google or Uber or Ford or GM, they're almost all either hybrids or battery electric vehicles. And that's because all those vehicles have high voltage electrical systems, and so they have plenty of electrical power to spare to drive all these actuators and sensors and processors. As we go towards production, you'll start seeing some, probably level 3 and level 4, highly automated but not necessarily fully autonomous vehicles that are using 48-volt mild hybrid systems, because they'll have enough power for those systems.
So does it also mean that we gain some efficiency with stuff like lighter weight alternators and lighter weight cabling, or does it go the other way? Because that's one of the things I remember. Just the older cars that were 6 volts, they had such heavy wire for the starter wire and stuff, and because you've got that Ohm's law thing going on where watts and volts affect the amperage, and really for a lot of stuff the current is what drives the need for thick cabling. But if you have enough voltage, you can reduce the amount of wire, which makes the car cheaper and lighter as well, or the gauge of the wire and that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the drivers for 48 volts, and one of the other reasons why you can't really up the power level from a 12-volt system, to go beyond that, 250 amps. If you go much beyond that, you've got to start going to much thicker cabling, which adds cost and weight. Whereas at 48 volts, you can keep the same, or in some cases even thinner cabling, reduce the weight. And if you go beyond 60 volts, then you have to start going back to the heavier cabling again, the more robust cabling and heavier connectors and all the other things that go along with a high voltage system. So that's why 48 volts is kind of the sweet spot.
Well, good. I look forward to it.
So that's what Mercedes has coming out next year. They've got this family of new engines. They actually launched the first one this year with their new 2-liter 4-cylinder diesel. But
that's in the S class.
Well, the 2-liter diesel is I don't think it's in the S class. It's in the new E class and then a couple of other models in Europe. So this new family of engines includes both gas and diesel engines, and they're all based around a 500 cc per cylinder architecture. So they've got 4 cylinders, inline 4s. They're going to have new inline 6s, 3-liter inline 6s, and a 4-liter V8. That all have the same basic cylinder design and combustion chamber design. Obviously it's different combustion chambers for the gas and diesel versions, but a lot of common architecture between those engines. And then what's going in the refreshed S class. The S class is getting a mid-cycle refresh next year, and it's getting this new 3-liter inline 6 with a 48-volt electrical system and what they're calling an integrated starter generator. So there's going to be an electric motor that also acts as the starter, that's mounted at the back where the torque converter would normally go, at the back of the engine. Yeah. And so that'll be part of a mild hybrid system in that car.
And these, they're spending $3 billion, €3 billion. What was the driver, I guess, for doing this kind of stuff? Because Mercedes engines are pretty good. They're pretty competitive.
despite, they have good engines now, but, just like over here, the EU emissions and fuel economy standards are getting tougher every year. And things are getting much tougher right now, because in the wake of the whole Volkswagen diesel scandal, starting next year, EU is going to start doing. They're starting to roll out what's known as the World Light Duty Test Protocol. So they're replacing the drive cycle that they use for emissions and fuel economy testing that they've used for the last 20 odd years. That what's known as the NEDC, the new European drive cycle, which is obviously no longer new. They're replacing that with the WLTP cycle. And that's going to include real world testing. So it's not all just in the lab, it's actually on the road testing as well. So they've developed test protocols for over the road testing. And so the new Mercedes engine family and everything else coming out, they're phasing this in starting in 2017, and by 2020 everything will be tested according to these new test standards. So they've got to meet those. So they've got to hit, ever lower CO2 emissions targets, and tougher standards on NOx and particulates and other emissions. And one of the things about even the gas versions of these engines, they're going to be the first gas engines that use particulate filter, just like the diesels.
Does that mean they're going to have like DPF and that kind of stuff, and they're going to need to go into like regen and burn off the particulates in the trap, or is it some kind of different system?
No, it's basically the same type. I mean, the frequency of regenerating the filter will probably be a lot less than what it is with a typical diesel, because the particulate levels are much lower to start with the gas engine than with the diesel, but they will have to go through that same kind of cycle. And the reason why is it turns out that direct injected engines actually produce more particulates generally than port injected engines. And that's led to some interesting phenomena. If you look at some of the latest engines, so Mercedes is adding a particulate filter to their new direct injected gas engines. Here in the U.S., the second generation Ford 3.5 liter EcoBoost that's launching in the 2017 pickup trucks. You may have noticed that it's using both direct injection and port injection. And so what they're doing is they're actually using, part of the reason why they're using the port injection, so they've got two injectors for every cylinder, is for the scenarios where the direct injection will tend to give you higher particulate emissions. That's partly where you're going to be using the port injection instead. So that allows them to avoid having to use a particulate filter. And similarly, when Chrysler updated the Pentastar last year, part of the reason why they did not switch to direct injection, because they don't have a turbocharged version of the Pentastar. It's only normally aspirated, so you don't get as much benefit from direct injection on a normally aspirated engine. And so they stuck with port injection again, so that they would not have to use a particulate filter going forward.
Yeah, well, and one of the other issues with direct injected vehicles is that because the injectors aren't firing on the backsides of the intake valves, there's been a pretty good amount of issues with those valves getting carboned up and needing to be cleaned off, manually, which is very expensive. And when you've bought this, fancy new car with all the new technology, it's kind of alarming to hear that you need to have the cylinder, the intake path, soda blasted or whatever. So yeah, it's interesting to watch how that technology plays out, because it certainly has benefits for power. You can run a higher compression with it, and that means you get more efficiency and ultimately more power out of it. These side issues, I don't know if they just didn't come out in the initial development testing, or if it was something that we knew we were going to have to solve eventually.
Well, I think they knew they would have to solve it eventually. It's just the standards as they do from time to time are getting more stringent. So they starting in 2017, they're phasing in here in the U.S. they're phasing in the Tier 3 emission standards, which cut the allowable particulate emissions even for gas engines. I think in half or maybe less. I can't remember. I have to go back and look. But it's a significant cut in allowable particulate emissions. So that's why for 2017 you're starting to see these updates being phased in. So they've known for a while they would have to do it eventually. It's just it wasn't necessary under the previous emission standards.
Yeah. Well, and that's you spent time at an automaker in your career. So anytime this stuff really ratchets up, there's the hue and cry that goes up, like, oh, we can't meet it. And then not magically, but then they do. They either wind up eating the cost for a while or passing the cost on to the consumer or both. And like, quite honestly, like that's okay to me. Like, I understand they're difficult standards to meet, and they have side effects. Especially you look at the early emissions controls from the 70s, they definitely killed performance for a while.
They had a lot of side effects.
But on the other hand, they were pushing the engineering and the technology of the day to a point where it hadn't gone before, and just like lots of clever engineering and problem solving, and eventually we got there. The average fleet economy went up. It peaked in about 1987, and it's been falling ever since. But
well, it was until about 2010, and then it's been climbing again.
Has it been climbing again? Okay, yeah. So clearly my information is old.
Yeah, you need to read the fuel economy trends report from EPA.
That sounds fascinating.
It's got actually there is a lot of interesting stuff in there. I'll send you a link to it tomorrow. Yeah. But it's got all the data going back to 1970 when they first started imposing emission controls, for fuel economy and emissions and all the other stuff. So you can compare how it's changed over time, and it did stagnate, for 20 odd years from the mid 80s until the mid 2000s when it started to go up again. They hit the thresholds, the original CAFE thresholds in the mid 80s, and then as CAFE didn't change, what manufacturers started to do was they said, and the technology kept evolving. They said, well, we're able to meet the CAFE standards that haven't changed, but we can increase the performance of these engines without hurting fuel economy. So what we saw over the next 20 years from the mid 1980s until the mid 2000s was that average power levels of new engines more than doubled, without hurting fuel economy at all. So effectively, what's known as specific fuel economy, the amount of fuel it takes to make a given amount of power, did actually double. It's just that we were using it to make more power instead of just for more fuel efficiency. So if we'd stayed at the same power levels, with 140 horsepower Mustangs that we had in 1985, then we would have had 35 mile per gallon Mustangs in 2005.
And that was the V8. Remember?
Yeah, that was with the V8.
It was a 5 liter.
Yeah. So instead, we now have 500, 600 horsepower, Mustangs and Camaros and even 300 horsepower minivans. A 300 horsepower minivan in 1984 would have been unheard of.
Yeah,
that was insane. But now it's the standard. So the development of the microprocessor, was key to that, enabling electronic controls for everything, sensors and the electronic control systems was the key to making all that happen.
Yeah, well, and that's just continued. All the features we enjoy now are really possible just the way cars have gotten so sophisticated. And that's a really good point for us to actually pivot to the other topic we wanted to cover this episode, which is autonomous vehicles and your friend and mine, George Hotz.
I don't know if I'd call him a friend,
but cars these days, and it's like back in the day, every system was its own system, and they didn't talk. They were wired separately usually. Now we have integrated command and control. It's it's the idea of sensor fusion, picked up from stuff like fighter jets, where the sensors are on a bus and it's networked communication and everything can talk to everything else. That's what enables stuff like even the semi-autonomous safety features that we've got already. And so George Hotz was working with his company Comma.ai to develop an aftermarket autonomous vehicle system. And you were supposed to talk to him, and they got a little, hey, you should watch out letter. And then they decided to just throw up their hands and not do their thing.
Yeah, so a little background on Mr. Hotz for those who are unfamiliar with him. He first came to be known publicly in 2007 at the age of 17 when he was part of the group that did the original jailbreak on the first generation iPhone a few months after it was launched. And then in the following years, he also jailbroke the Sony PlayStation 3 and got sued by Sony for that, for infringing on their intellectual property. That suit was eventually dropped. Over the years, he's had stints working at Google and Facebook, short stints. It turns out apparently he doesn't get along well with others. But he's worked on a number of interesting projects, and about a year ago he popped up again. He started working on his car. He decided to try to add autonomous capability to his own personal car. He had a Honda ILX, and around about December of last year, The Verge did a story on him, on what he was doing. And then a few months later, he got a $3 million investment round from some Silicon Valley investors, and launched the company Comma.ai with the intention of launching a product, basically creating an aftermarket autonomous driving system that you could add to your own car for $1,000, and wanted to have it on the market by the end of 2017. And then in September, this past September, he went on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco, showed off what he called the Comma.1, his product that was initially going to be compatible with the ILX and the Honda Civic. And it included a processor and a camera, and then would plug into the OBD2 port and use the radar sensor that's already in the car if you had the adaptive cruise control. And then last Friday, he was supposed to do a keynote at a conference that I was chairing in San Francisco on autonomous cars. And as I was walking into the venue on Friday morning, I was looking at my phone and saw in my news feed, Comma.ai cancels its Comma.1 product after getting a letter from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And I got inside and found out that they'd canceled. He wasn't going to be there, and so I had to get up and talk in his place. I've been trying to reach out to Hotz and to others at Comma.ai for the last 6 months, and to talk to them and learn more about what they were doing. And no one from Comma.ai has ever responded to any of my inquiries.
Yeah, and just the way, so I should preface this by saying, it's nothing if not ambitious, and we need that. I think we do need ambitious people to push audacious goals. That's good. But the Valley has this reputation for being arrogant and
you could say that,
and childish and very insular. And so on the outside, I'm completely across the country from them, and my impression is they got this letter that said, hey, we understand you're doing this thing to make this product. There's a few things you should know. And if you're going to sell it, you're going to be subject to this scrutiny and these regulations. And, you're really going to have to make sure that you can pass these tests. It wasn't a gotcha in any stretch of the imagination by NHTSA. It seemed actually pretty cordial. It was it was not a nasty letter. They just said, hey, we heard what you're doing. We've got some questions. We just want to make sure that, what you're planning to put out there is actually going to be safe and isn't going to endanger the people driving these vehicles or others on the road. And, if you're tampering with existing safety systems on the car, that's something you should be aware of. So as soon as I got the letter, Comma.ai said, okay, fine, we're canceling the project. Yeah, which is
moving on to something else.
That's crap. Like there are federal motor vehicle safety standards. They're published. They should have known that they were going to be subject to sort of, working within those guidelines. And just to throw up your hands and be like, yeah, you know what, we're done. We're out. Like, you have an opportunity to actually work within the guidelines and build the product and still be the first to the market, even if you have to delay it, if you need more funding. But just to give up is like, somebody else is going to fill that void at some point.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they will. And let me just say that I have the utmost respect for George Hotz and his skills. But to be honest with you, after seeing what he's done in the past week, I'm frankly glad that this project has been canceled, because I have a suspicion that it would not be very reliable, and that a lot of people would have bought this thing not really fully understanding what its limitations are, and it has some serious limitations. Basically, they've only been testing this thing in and around the Silicon Valley area. And I can imagine, people in all kinds of places, getting this thing and bolting it into their car and then, having it just simply, not function properly or not function at all, in bad weather conditions, if it snows or rains, right, or, all kinds of other conditions. And then, getting into accidents that either, injure or kill themselves, their passengers, or other people on the road. I think, if you're going to put things like this in a car, it's your responsibility before you put something like this on the market to make sure that it really is safe. And I firmly believe that, ultimately autonomous vehicles will prove to be much safer than human drivers in most conditions. And, it will, the shift towards autonomous vehicles, will save, countless lives every year, as well as, reducing congestion, and improving air quality and efficiency, energy efficiency. And I think those are all good things. But I want to make sure that, along the way that we don't take any shortcuts, because those shortcuts, could be very costly.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like they had done the easy part. The easy part is, as surprising as it seems, like the easy part is to connect the pieces together and get them working. The hard part is all the fine tuning, the environmental, the algorithms for it to deal with environmental conditions and weather. Like, not even if there's snow on the ground, but imagine in a heavy rainstorm or even, a snow squall is going to really confuse a camera-based system, especially at night. Mm-hmm. Those are all things you have to figure out how to make that work. And it's not that it can't be done. I mean, the Subaru EyeSight system's pretty incredible for what it does. And it's very similar to the Comma.ai in that sense, where it's camera based and then it ties in with all of the other systems. So that's been worked out to a degree. It's not fully autonomous, but it has some of that logic. It's just, that's a lot of challenges to overcome.
One of the things, one of the big philosophy in Silicon Valley, is to fail fast and iterate. That this is the thing that everybody in the Valley talks about doing. They want to, try different things, see what works, see what doesn't, toss the things that don't and move on to something else.
And that's cool for an R&D perspective. That works great.
During my engineering career, I started, I graduated in 1990 and worked for 17 years, in the auto industry as an engineer. And that's what we did every single day of my engineering career. We fail fast and iterate. What we didn't do was we didn't put those products into customer hands until we iterated to the point where we were confident that it was actually going to be safe. And that's the difference. You can put out what they call a minimally viable product, if you're putting out a messaging app or building a camera filter app or a social network, because if it fails, it's no big deal. You reboot it and you go on. It's not going to kill anybody. But with a car, if you're putting safety systems into a car, the level of what is actually viable is much, much higher. And I think it's critically important that everybody remember that. And when I got up and spoke last Friday, I told this story about, back in the early 90s, I was in northern Sweden working on a traction control system. And at the time, I was looking at the data, when we were doing this development, especially, winter development, summer development, we were working fast. We were making dozens of changes, or hundreds of changes every day, recompiling, code, 20 times a day, reflashing it into the car and going out and doing more launches, doing more stops, running around the handling course and looking at the data. And, when I was looking at the data doing this traction control work, I noticed a correlation between the way the wheel speeds were behaving and when the car was oversteering or understeering. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe I can put together an algorithm that detects oversteer and understeer. And I did that, and in those days, all we had to work with was the wheel speeds. For the traction, for ABS, we only had wheel speeds and the brake switch. And for traction control, we also had engine torque feedback and the accelerator pedal position. But we didn't have any accelerometers to work with, no yaw rate or any of the other things that you have in stability control systems today.
Your processors were like a 8086 and a 555 timer.
Yeah, well, it was actually an Intel 80 C196, which was pretty close to an 8086. It was actually a derivative of the 8086 for automotive applications.
Right, so it was like lower power and more robust.
Yeah, I think it was maybe 12 or 16 megahertz. I mean, it was bad.
But it's amazing what you can do with those things and the software, like the fuel injection maps.
Especially when you're writing everything in assembly code.
Yeah,
but
they're amazing.
Anyway, I put together this algorithm that actually did a pretty reasonable job of detecting oversteer and understeer, and even estimating the lateral acceleration based on what the wheel speeds were doing, and had it working pretty well around a handling course going around cut through the snow on a frozen lake. And then at the end of the winter, and that took me a couple of weeks to get that tuned in pretty well. And at the end of the winter, we came back to Michigan and started testing it on other surfaces, and realized that we've got some problems here. There's just not, the system is not going to be reliable enough, when the car really starts sliding hard, and it's not going to be a robust enough algorithm without more sensor inputs. And so what we did was we decided to shelve it, but there was actually a part of it that worked well, which was just the cornering detection, which we ended up incorporating into the ABS and into the traction control, and it was in there for at least the next dozen years, and may still be there today for all I know. But that that part of it, we figured out, okay, here's what actually works, and only put that part into production. The rest of it, we had to wait until we had more sensors and we could do it reliably. We didn't put out something that that would work great under one condition and not anywhere else. Especially if the driver can't select that, or we can't expect the driver to be able to select it. And really, I think that's what you're potentially putting out with Comma 1, was something that could work okay in certain conditions, but wasn't I don't think was really going to be robust enough to work reliably under all conditions.
Yeah, and that's I think the ongoing challenge with everybody developing autonomous tech. And I know that you've really dug in to covering this and understanding it and just following the developments of it. Where do you come down on autonomous vehicles? I mean, certainly they're coming whether we like it or not. But like, what do you see the future of that looking like? You hear predictions anywhere from like, oh, in a year we're going to have self-driving cars and it's going to revolutionize everything, to other folks saying that's 15 to 20 years off.
I think for widespread adoption, it's definitely closer to 15 years. It's going to be late 2020s before we get into really mass adoption. There's definitely stuff being tested today, and they're only just now starting to test, under, a much wider variety of conditions, and they're starting to test edge cases. And, the rule of thumb in engineering is, you got this 90-10 rule. It takes you 10% of the time to do, 90% of the work, but that last 10%, that is all the edge cases, that's what takes you 90% of the time and effort. And they're just getting started on that part of it. So I think, what we're going to see, is early 2020s, like 2021, or so, when companies like Ford and Volvo and others have said they're going to have autonomous vehicles on the road. That's about the right time frame. So about 5 years from now, we're going to see these vehicles deployed in ride-hailing services, and only in specific places where they're confident that the system's going to work reliably and robustly. Where the conditions are right. Where you've got well-marked lanes and you've got good high-definition maps and all the other elements that you need for a reliable autonomous operation. And then over time, as the technology continues to develop, it'll get rolled out, to more and more places. But I think, what's going to happen is we're going to see these deployed primarily in ride-hailing services and on-demand mobility services, which is what they're testing now in places like Singapore. They've got a test going with Nutonomy, and Delphi is going to be joining that shortly with a fleet of their own vehicles. Basically autonomous taxi services. And I'm increasingly of the opinion that individuals may never actually be able to buy an autonomous car. I think that they may only be available to us through these mobility services for a number of reasons. One, the cost is going to be very high, and also, by controlling them through these services, where you use them as needed, you can keep the cost to individuals lower. But also, the manufacturers can actually make sure that the vehicles are properly maintained, that they're serviced with the right parts. You don't want cheap third-party sensors being put into these things or actuators. You want the correct parts being used in these things. And I think that the manufacturers will actually be the ones running most of these services. So I think, I don't think that standalone companies like Uber and Lyft are going to exist by the mid to late 2020s. I think that they will get absorbed into the car makers.
So, why the push to this though? Like, what's the driving factor behind all this, other than people seem to want it?
Well, we had 35,000 people die on the roads in this country last year. We're on pace for over 37,000 this year. More than 1 million people die on the roads every year globally. In 2014, for the first time, more than half the world's population lived in cities, lived in urban areas. And that, as population continues to grow, the UN projects, that population is going to be somewhere around 9.7 billion by 2050. And somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of those people will live in cities. So right now we've got 20-some mega cities of more than 10 million people. By 2050, that's going to be in the mid 40s. We've all seen the pictures of places like Beijing and Mumbai and even Manhattan and San Francisco and LA. The traffic, these enormous traffic jams, and that's only going to get worse. And you can't, as you have more people living in cities that want to get around, you can't expand the road infrastructure. You can't put in more road capacity because you've got buildings and everything. So it's just not realistic to do that. So somehow you have to figure out how do you move more people more efficiently, while containing the road infrastructure. And one way to do that is to have fewer vehicles that are in use more of the time, that are shuttling people around, so you don't have to have parking for the vehicles. You can have vehicles that are sized to the application. When you've got people traveling alone, you don't need to have a big minivan or SUV. You can have small pods that take them around. So you can have a variety of different vehicles, depending on what people's needs are at any moment, for any particular trip, they can get the right kind of vehicle. So you can optimize the whole system a lot more, and get everybody moving around more efficiently. And then combine that in a multimodal system with mass transit. So you got mass transit, you got buses and subways for the high density routes, and then the autonomous vehicles for the first mile and last mile to get people to their final destinations.
So what you've described is basically light rail. or public transportation in some way.
It's Yeah, but it's a different kind of public transportation. Instead of, public transportation, traditional public transportation, you've got vehicles, whether it's buses, trains, whatever, they operate on fixed routes, going from one point to another. Whereas, what I'm describing is more point-to-point personal mass transit. So you can move people around. So you can go from any point in a city to any other point in a city whenever you need to, wherever, under any conditions. So you're not restricted to the fixed routes that you have for your mass transit systems.
Yeah, and that fits well sort of with the highly personalized consumer desires, I guess, and society that we've got. And it does make sense. For a tinfoil hat guy like me, I guess, it kind of makes me wonder, like, as things get more and more sophisticated, I find myself liking less and less sophisticated cars.
Hence the 1999 Crown Victoria.
Correct. I really like how dark that cabin gets at night. Like, I can focus on the road because it's got about 10 watts of headlight power too.
You need to get yourself one of those, I guess, the early 90s or mid 90s Saab with the
the night
what did they
panel?
call it? Yeah, and basically it would turn off everything except the speedometer and tach, and maybe even just leave the speedometer lit.
Yeah,
didn't even leave the tach lit up.
I can probably
turn off all the other lights.
I can probably wire the Crown Vic more efficiently than I can get a Saab that actually works. And I'm also like one of my projects will be to wire the headlights to individual relays, so that I can run them directly off the battery, and they will be brighter, and then I can run higher wattage bulbs and all of those fun things. But how am I going to share the road with a bunch of automated cars that, I'm the variable in that situation. I'm the unpredictable variable until I'm legislated out of, the ability to use the roads. And that's kind of what spooks me, is at a certain point, there's going to be this undeniable friction between the high tech and the those who choose not to adopt the technology.
Well, let me ask you a question, Dan. Do you actually enjoy driving into central Boston?
No. Only off hours.
Okay. So here's kind of what I foresee probably happening in the mid 2020s and beyond. In a lot of these big cities, increasingly I think today, if you go to London, if you go to England, they've got in central London there's a congestion zone. And if you want to drive into that congestion zone, you have to pay £25 a day to drive your car into the congestion zone.
That's like $30-something bucks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine, in 2025, instead of paying £25 a day to drive into the congestion zone, when you get to the perimeter of that zone, you just park your car and you get in a little pod that takes you to your final destination. And you don't have to deal with the traffic and the congestion and trying to find your way around. You just tell it where you want to go and it takes you there, and then it goes off and picks somebody else up. And that's what I foresee happening. Is I think cities, will probably, once we have some confidence in these systems, cities will probably ban human-driven vehicles from urban centers and only allow autonomous vehicles within those zones. And over time, those zones will get bigger, expand outwards, towards the perimeter of the city. And eventually, you'll only be driving out in the outskirts or in on country roads, which is really the place where you actually want to take control of the car anyway, right?
Yeah, no, and honestly, the last few times I've gone into Boston, I've done essentially that. I'll park at there's the subway, so I'll park at a Green Line stop and I'll take the Green Line in, and it's instead of going into Boston in a car is expensive. You got to park somewhere. It's the last few times I've gone, I've been in the financial district. Parking there is like $40 for not too long. So I've parked the car. I walk maybe half mile to the actual Green Line stop. It's $2.75 or something one way, so a round trip is like $5.50. There's I get on the Green Line train. Boston's a small enough city, I can get anywhere in the city off the Green Line or off the subway. Like I can take the Green Line and hop onto the other lines. There's only like 4 lines. That's great in that environment, but not every city has that. So I guess I can see your point. My concern is, I guess, when that radius starts to get larger, you know, when that zone starts to expand, because, you know, if you're going to outlaw it, that's cool if you've made the alternative attractive and available. It's, you know, one can't lag the other. And we saw this, you know, again, like transit around Boston. We had, if you look at the way the highways go, there's two rings. There's, you know, Interstate 95 that rings the city in the sort of near suburbs. There's Interstate 495, which is, you know, maybe 15, 20 miles further west, and it goes around even further, and they eventually connect up, you know, and it's like that all the way down the East Coast. You've got the sort of 95, and then if you want to go around 95, you've got the you know, the 395, 195, 295. In Boston, there was supposed to be a closer ring that they never built. And so that's my concern, is like, you're going to have these plans in place, and then they're going to get sort of confused and translated and politically messed with, that they're not going to be fully implemented. So we're going to have this on the one hand, this great idea, this great plan, and on the other hand, we're going to have, you know, crappy implementation, and nobody's going to be able to get anywhere.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's going to be a total mess for, you know, at least the next 25, 30 years.
Well, that's a great positive outlook.
But, you know, we need challenges to, you know, to keep our brains stimulated, and you know, need things problems to try and find solutions to. And so that's what we're doing Wheelbearings for, so we can figure out all those solutions and tell the world about it.
Yeah, well, good. We have blathered. I'm looking at the clock now. We've been going for a while, a little more than an hour and a half, and I know that this episode is a little looser because it's the first episode. We've got some structure that we will put in there. You know, we definitely want to hear some listener correspondence. So we have an email set up that people can write to us. It's a Gmail. It's what is it, Sam? You know it off the top of your head.
Oh. I knew
Damn it, I don't know it off the top of my head.
It's wheelbearingscast at gmail.com. So wheelbearingscast, WHEELBEARINGSCAST at gmail.com. And you and I will have access to that, and we'll try to answer listener emails. And, you know, if you've got any suggestions for the show, topics you'd like us to talk about, we're going to be incorporating in upcoming episodes interviews with some of the interesting people in the industry when we get a chance to talk to them. And I'll be out at the LA Auto Show week after next, so hopefully I'll get some good interviews out there, and we'll just keep blathering on about you know, what we think is interesting in the world of cars and transportation.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be lots to talk about. And we picked wheel bearings because they kind of, you know, after sometimes they run nice and smooth and true, and then they get old and cranky and they grumble and they growl, and that's
well, you know, and the word bearings too, you know, implies direction, you know, and we're talking about, you know, the direction of where things are going, and trying to figure out what that direction is, and understand why we're going there. So I think, you know, it's been hopefully an entertaining first show, and we'll try and keep it going.
Yeah, I agree with that. So thanks for listening, and we will see everybody next episode. These are going to come regularly, so yeah, stay tuned.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.